Well, my parents were refugees from, China. As you know, he was one of the first to be naturalized as citizens of British Borneo. And I grew up in KK. No, this is after 1949. My parents basically came in 1951. And I grew up, studied at All Saints and then Sabah College. Out of my class of, in the sixth form, 24, I calculated we had 19 either doctor or PhD. I didn't get a PhD, but I came back. So it's, but I worked in Malaysia, as you know, and then I worked abroad. So I've done my national service. I feel very honored to be appointed special advisor to the chief minister. And I think I've actually done, after I stepped down as executive chairman of this Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission, I did not take any paid jobs. I basically became an advisor. And I see my job, so I'm not retired in the sense, but I see my job as using the experience of several crises. In Banagara, I helped solve the deposit-taking cooperatives between 1986 to 1989. Helping the writing of BAFIA, the Banking and Financial Institutions Act. And then I went to the World Bank for 5 years. After that, I went to Hong Kong as Deputy Chief Executive, the newly formed Hong Kong Monetary Authority. And during the Asian crisis, 1997, the Chief Executive of Hong Kong appointed me Executive Director of, Securities and Futures Commission, looking after the securities market. So my view is that there's a difference between an advisor and a person who is imposed. The imposed person is not only has the tough job of theorizing or forming the policy, but executing it. And having seen through several crises, and as my old mentor used to say, you have a lot of scars behind your back. You learn to be a little bit more humble about what advice you can give. The point is that, like everything else, advice is easy, execution is very tough. And I think Sabah has gone through, ups and downs. And when I was growing up, timber prices were record high. Sandakan had the first BMW sold in anywhere in Southeast Asia. We were so rich. It was the height of the timber boom. And then, as you know, after we joined Malaysia, discovery of oil, palm oil. So Sabah went through a great period, and then it had its challenges, as we all know. But at that time, I was abroad. So I don't know enough about Sabah, and I'm here to learn. My view is very straightforward. I had a methodology which I put in my book. Crisis is an event. Reform is a process. So if you want to reform, and what does reform mean? Reform means changing your mindset, understanding your context, and move very strategically. Because you cannot do everything at once. In democracies, you are lucky in one term of government to achieve 3 great things. If you get the big things right, the small things will take care of themselves. If you try to solve everything at the same time, the chances are you may get exhausted. And so one must strategize, prioritize, and then institutionalize. And then, you really need to pick what you want to do and deliver what you do so that you get the right feedback of whether you're right or wrong. And if you succeed, you push ahead. If you don't succeed, you fall back, regroup, and then push again. But you must have a very clear view of where you want to go. And at the heart of it is your values. And I think in today's world, the world is so complex. Things are changing so fast that anybody who tell you that this is right or that is wrong is more likely to be wrong than right. Because we cannot predict what Mr. Trump is going to do, right? And nobody predicted that on the 28th of February, he would launch a war that would create oil prices so high. So everything has benefits, also costs, opportunities, as well as challenges, right? So it's a matter of trade-off, how you weigh it. So I as I said, I feel very honored, and I don't have all the answers. This phase of my mission is to learn first. Once I begin to have a little bit more understanding, and so in the next few months, I will hope to come back to Sabah more often, talk to many friends, meet many new friends, understand what's going on before I can begin to give, what I consider my own view. And I stress, what I say may not be right. It's my view, depend upon my experience, how things, should be thought about, reflected upon, and if possible, move ahead. So let me very quickly run through three things that I think, in very broad terms, what we could think about. What I call the 3 T's. Now, it can be in order, but in my view, Sabah's great natural area is tourism. Singapore Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew said very well that the tourist is your best investor. They come here, they like it, they will spend money or they will invest money here, right? So how do we tell the story of Sabah? In today's crazy world, the land below the wind is a oasis of peace and harmony. So other people may find Sabah very nice to come. And we got very good food, we got very good culture, we got the best blue coastal marine reefs, blue ocean, with a fantastic mountain. We got still very old forests, got huge biodiversity, and there were lovely cultures, each of them very precious. So how do we make use of this to help people come here and invest here? That's one priority. Now, it's not the only priority, but at least that's quite useful. The second is that anything you do in life is all about people, talent. So tourism, talent. Because to tell a story is people. To do things is people. The Chinese have a saying, 天时地利人和. Time, which is opportunity. Geography, where you are. And human unity. Now that we have the elections, Sabah people have spoken. We all want to have something good for Sabah. And I think everybody wanted good for Sabah. But for a variety of reasons, the talent is an issue that we need to spend time on. Why? And this is not Sabah's fault. It was the fault of our former colonial masters
who basically train our people to fit their needs, not our needs. So, for example, my classmates, they got Shell Scholarship. Several of them went to do top physicists. At that time, when they finish the physics, they want to do PhD. Is there a job in Sabah for a top-level physicist? No. That's realistic about it. Okay? So actually, I learned, over the years that the Western education train, non-Westerners or former colonial people to fit the needs of the colonial masters, not necessarily for them, not for the whole country. Right? So the danger, therefore, is that we train them for very good, and we always say, oh, they can go to Stanford, or they can Oxford, they go to Cambridge. But if they go and they don't come back, what benefit do we get from this? You see what I'm saying? Right? So we're training our people for somebody else, not for us. The best example is, currently I live in Penang. They all say, oh, we must do technology. But I train a coder. He can get 3 times the salary in Singapore immediately after you train him. So are you training for Penang or are you training for Singapore? That's the issue, right? So how do we now tell the story of our young? That they must come back and help make Sabah grow, right? Make Sabah great again. I mean, that's an issue. So talent is very important. And talent is all about know-how. And AI is know-how. So the third one is technology. Because technology has changed the game. Right? It's a real game changer. Why is America fighting or having a lot of differences with China? Because they're fighting over technology. So you understand these 3 T's, there is a basic issue that I have not yet begun to understand, and I want to learn more about it, is that nothing can be done without energy. Now, Sabah actually has a lot of energy. Sabah has a lot of food, water, and oil and gas. And now palm oil. Palm oil can also be converted into bioenergy, right? So how do we now use this energy? And so we have issues of getting money to fund what we need to do. Now, obviously, the money needs to be invested in infrastructure, but the best investment, as everybody knows, is in people. When you invest in people, you train people right, they will give you a return over the whole life. But that person must be back here in Sabah or outside helping Sabah, because if it doesn't help Sabah, Sabah doesn't benefit. So we have to rethink the whole talent development, right? And then there is one further area which, I want to use the idea of the fern. Now, everywhere in the world they eat fern, but Sabah we have the Sabah fern, which is a very good dish. But you think about the fern is the oldest surviving plant. And why is the fern so good? Because it turns, you see, and when it turns, it slowly unwinds. It unwinds into what is known as the Fibonacci mathematical series, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, etc. It slowly grows. And unlike a normal plant, vegetable, okay, the fern does not give a seed, it gives spores. And so you have millions of spores spread all out, blown by the wind, go everywhere it survives. Then it has a single root that goes straight very deep into the soil. And so it can survive with very little water, under great heat, but is resilient. And to me, the fern is ancient, so we must be very proud of our history, our heritage, our warisan. And then the fern turns, it turns. And then it learns to grow, in very difficult environment. But the last one is to earn. Because if we don't earn, if we don't profit, we cannot live on charity, right? a lot of NGOs, we used to think about education as an expense. Education is an industry. You can make money, right? Tourism is not an expense, it's an industry, right? So how do we do this? The turning means the turning of the mindset. Learning means we have to learn every day, because if we send a child to university, by the time he or she graduates 3 years, half of what they learn is obsolete. Okay? And so we must accept the fact that we are now into a lifetime learning issue. But learning is no good, because if learn is expending energy, if you don't earn, you cannot survive. So you must earn. And so how to monetize and use our comparative advantages to strengthen our comparative advantages is very critical. Now, these are very general principles, but Sabah is unique. Every country, every state, every economy, every kampong, every community is unique, and therefore we must understand, these specific areas, and that will take time. So this is not a, Andrew Sheng has no instant solutions. We have to think about this. We have to learn. We have to be. I feel that I have to be learning from all my friends and young people, especially from the young. And if everybody, we find the right story in Sabah, things will succeed. Oh my goodness! When I was working in Banagara, we were around between 1, and then we slipped to 1.1, and that's when.
So you started at 1 to 1.
Oh, the at that time it was a Straits dollar, right? During independence time, it was a Straits dollar. During the colonial time, in the Straits dollar, so Sing dollar is the same as Malayan dollar, which is then became the Malaysian ringgit, right? It was 1 to 1, and then 1.1, and at the 1.1 stage, two things happened. One was Singapore moved along the industrial and the financial center logistic path, which is very different from Malaysia, which is still very rural at that time, and more primary industries than secondary industries rather than tertiary industries. So Singapore, once they go to financial center, they want a strong Sing dollar. And they decided they want high value industries, so they want strong Sing dollar. But Malaya, especially Malaya, a lot of people are from the kampong, and the prosperity of the kampong depends upon the palm oil. And the palm oil price is paid in US dollars, not in ringgit at that time, right? Because we're too small. So if we become very strong, we get less and less. So strong ringgit is good for the urban areas, but not good for the rural areas, right? And so during that period when I was in Banagara, it became very clear that a weaker ringgit, if we sell our oil at the US dollar price and our ringgit is weaker, we get more ringgit for development, right? Okay? And if the kampong people get more for their palm oil prices, get more for their rubber prices, get more for their tin prices, it's good for Malaysia. The strong ringgit enable us to buy the equipment for urban area, urban industry. Strong ringgit good for urban people to buy foreign goods cheap. But what matters in the kampong people, the ringgit is, for me to buy my basics, my food, my petrol, my housing, right? So the political economy of Malaysia was very different from Singapore. So that we began to diverge. All right. And and then of course we went through the Asian crisis, we boomed. And then we went into the Asian crisis, and then we had exchange control. In the minute we had exchange control, people look at Malaysia slightly differently. Oh, I put my money in Malaysia, there is always exchange. Well, that's not, true, that you can always take your money out. But the minute you have stopped the door, some people say, well, maybe you can stop the door again. So to that extent, Malaysia, having an exchange control took a while to convince foreign investors that investing in Malaysia will not stop them taking their money out. Okay. So, there are differences in policies between Singapore, which is a financial center. They have to encourage people to come in, and people can take their money out anytime, right? In Malaysia, we have exchange control. You still have to apply to Bank Negara. You can take your money in, but if you don't register with Bank Negara, you can't take it out later, right? I mean, this is, Bank Negara will allow the banks to approve to take out, but in special circumstances, they still have exchange control. So these are the special factors which make it very different. Well, I think the Washington consensus is there. It's gone. It's broken. Not just Trump. I think everybody already accepted after the 2008 crisis that the old Washington consensus is gone. What is going to replace it? Nobody knew for sure. But today under Trump, the MAGA people, the right-wing guys, they said this Washington consensus is at my expense. Okay? So now MAGA means goodbye, World Trade Organization, goodbye climate change, goodbye traditional rules, right? So the rule of law, as you know, has now been broken, because the biggest economy doesn't necessarily believe in it. Now, is there a Beijing consensus? I've written about it a long time. The Chinese themselves do not agree on what the Beijing consensus is. Now, and the reason is why there is no Beijing consensus. Is there a BRICS consensus? There is no BRICS consensus. Because the world is so diverse, everybody have their own views. There is a Washington consensus because I'm Taiko, I'm the biggest guy. I tell you, you all agree. You open up your market. Free market, good for you. Free dollar, good for you. Free trade, good for you. Democracy, good for you. So when they put like this, but actually what they're doing is they put a gun to your head and said, this is very good for you. And if you don't agree, the aircraft carrier will come, right? So to a large extent, suddenly, the Ukraine war and the Iran war has suddenly they realize, my goodness, it's like this. It's not like the old idea, there is Uncle Sam who's willing to give you money, make it very good for you. Because, if they, why didn't people invest in Africa? They just went in there, they took everything from Africa. And the African says, there's a very good saying from the former founder of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. I'm sorry if I offend people, but this is what Jomo Kenyatta said. He said, when the white man came, they had the Bible, we had the land. After they teach us how to read the Bible, we were reading the Bible, they took the land. Right? Sounds familiar? I mean, he spoke the truth. Okay? So today, we have to think for ourselves. We cannot say, somebody will help us. MAGA means what is good for America is good for America. I don't have a problem. But some of what is good for America may be not necessarily good for me. So we have to think what is good for ourselves. Right? And the whole idea of a conversation, a consensus, is not somebody agreed by somebody. Consensus means we have a very good conversation. You have your view, I have my view, he has a view, she has a view. If all of us slowly try to have a good conversation, and then we build up the trust, we build up what can be done, not what ought to be done. A lot of people have aspirations. I say AI actually is the wrong wording. A stands for aspirations. Aspirations is in what the Chinese call mission hope, project hope. I hope it will be done. But actually impact is what is most important, whether you deliver or you don't deliver, right? If you don't deliver, aspirations becomes broken trust. The trust is broken. You promise me something, you never give me something, so there's no impact, right? In very simple terms, the biggest problem in the world today, in climate change, in politics, is GDP is growing, but the people are unhappy. So we have to rethink the game. Are we pushing GDP for the sake of GDP, or are we pushing how to make people happy? And making people happy is not just about giving you more money. It has to be pride. It has to be values. It has to be fairness. It has to be harmony, right? And that is not built overnight. It takes a long time to do this. And I think, the idea, therefore, is, let's think through what is that aspiration? What is the consensus? That's why there is no Beijing consensus. Because within China, people think, oh, Chinese is only some people say something goes. It's not true. The Chinese are 1.4 billion. When you try to, govern 1.4 billion people, there are 1.4 billion views. And try to get it right is not easy. So that's why they have a very complex process of consultation. Okay? Now, this is not elected, but the consultation does exist. Okay? And it's all about what I call error correction. You see, if you are a dictator or a leader, you can make decisions that are wrong. But a smart leader or a smart system correct errors. I make the error, I retreat, I adjust, I move forward again. But if I make the error, I don't adjust, I double down, the consequences are disastrous. Okay? So the successful, resilient society, economy, community is a one that has error correction. It adapts, okay? It mitigates. It corrects its own errors. And I think the people the Raya are very wise. I always say there's no one person know everything, right? There's no one solution for everything. If the people are patient, they are wise, we will find our own solution. And just like nature will always find a way. Okay? You cut the forest down. You have the COVID. 3 years later, the jungle is growing again. The animals are coming out again, right? Who is disturbing the jungle? It's man who is disturbing the jungle, right? So everything has consequences. And society moves on. It faces a challenge or you respond. Let me repeat this. There is no Beijing consensus. Because even within China, they have huge debate. Actually, the Chinese economy is not one economy. It probably minimum 5-6 economies within China. There's the coastal economy. And within the coastal economy, there's a heavy manufacturing economy. And then there's a high-tech economy in Shenzhen, one around Shanghai, which is multinational, right? But slightly heavier. They go for cars. They go from, heavy manufacturing. Then, you go down to, so the Shanghai, what geographically is called the Yangtze River Delta. But let's call it the Shanghai, development area, including Zhejiang, Jiangxi, that group, right? Then there is the Pearl River Delta, today called the Greater Bay Area. And that's basically using Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Macau, Zhuhai, Guangdong. That area is another different economy. Different. So it's not the in the past, Shanghai was very important to the Chinese economy because it was not only international port, but now the Greater Bay Area, has technology. Shenzhen is number one in a lot of areas, right? But around Beijing has the top universities in the world. Some of it, of course, you've heard of Peking University, Tsinghua, but the aeronautics engineering, the petroleum university, they got the highest concentration of top university, but not very well known in the world, are in Beijing. So the Beijing area, the Beijing-Tianjin area, is the third growth pole, right? I'm not using number 3. Is one of the 5 or 6, right? So then you're around the Wuhan area. There's another, central China, very different one. And then you go to Chengdu, Chongqing, and then the Yunnan. There's another one, right? So China is actually different economies, and some of them are still very poor. Okay, some of them are very poor. So the whole idea is that the managing China, as the Prime Minister Wen Jiabao says, is mission impossible. They are trying to balance 1.4 billion people needs, and with huge gap between here and there. It's a very complex task. That's why there is no Beijing consensus. And that's why the Chinese never try to say when they go to Africa, they never try to say the Chinese system is the best. Because they know that nobody can replicate China in what the Chinese are doing, right? And when you go to Africa, the Africans are basically saying the white man comes and exploit everything, and then they just leave and they tell you must have democracy, you have all this. The Chinese don't very practical. You got minerals, you got coal, you lack infrastructure. I build this for you, right? And so they don't try to catch out in your political system. Now maybe this will not last, but to a large extent, that's why I say every country must find their own path. Just like every individual must find his or her own path. There is no such thing as, this is the right path. Actually, as you know, the old Washington consensus was one size fit all solution. But actually, that one size fit all is to fit America's needs, not to fit everybody else's needs. The best example is the Arab Spring. In the year 2000, when they started invading Iraq and everything, they encouraged democracy in all the Arab countries. What did they get? More chaos. So one must be more humble. You can't change people overnight, right? And we are still suffering from colonial history. Africa, you look at the line, all straight line. There's nothing, the country, different tribes, different geography. Okay? So governing African economy is almost mission impossible. Same is true of Middle East. The Middle East is in trouble because they got oil. And when they have oil, they draw the straight line here like that. Okay? So, these countries are still have lots of disagreement, not only just religious lines, but on ethnic lines, tribal lines, all this, and they're still fighting, right? And other people exploit these differences to create the problems. So my view is we cannot have this top-down development model, right? In Malaysia, particularly during the after 1980, when under the Mahathir era, there was a lot of centralization. And today, if you look at Malaysia, Johor State is booming because it's very close to Singapore. Sarawak is booming because they got a lot of energy. Penang is doing quite well because of the semiconductors. Sabah now beginning to find its own strategic position. We're not quite there yet, but there is the theme of the blue economy because of our natural resources. But how do we fit the talent to the natural resources is an issue that I'm here to learn, right? But I'm very hopeful. A lot of people I've met, I must say Sabah's talent is amazing. Well, the first thing about International Financial Center is that it's part of imperial history. What do I mean? The first International Financial Center that, it was, I guess, the Genoese, Genoa, Italy, was the traders, and they were the bankers, right? And they were Italians, but there were also a lot of Jewish. And they financed the trade between the East and the West. So the Genoan bankers financed the trade going through Istanbul, Constantinople, right? But when the Ottoman Empire conquered Istanbul, or Constantinople, the East-West trade collapsed. And that's why the Genoese people, no money, they moved west. They persuaded Spain and Portugal, you are the venture capitalists. We bank you to go to Africa. So the Portuguese went to Africa via the Cape of Good Hope. And Christopher Columbus says the fastest way to China is west. And instead they see this, by accident, they discovered America. So and then the Dutch followed the Spain and so the Dutch invented the East Indies Company. So they have a stock exchange. And the idea is that I issue the stocks, you invest in the Dutch East Indian Company, and then if you make money in Indonesia, you become very rich. Just like today you invest in Nvidia, you become very rich, right? Okay, or you buy gold, you become very rich. So the Dutch were very successful. Then during when the Charles the first had his head cut off, Britain decided to import the William of Orange, the prince, to England. This Dutch prince brought Dutch technology of stock market, corporate, okay, all to London. So London became the international financial center. They discovered how to do this, right? And when London became a financial center, they make strategic mistakes in fighting the First World War and the Second World War. So Britain became bankrupt, and then New York rose. So how did the international financial center come across? Because the British said, Martin, the dollar will take over. So what do? We create international offshore financial center in all the former British colonies, like the Virgin Islands, like Hong Kong, like Singapore. They were financial centers, tax-free. Okay, so now you have a situation whereby Shanghai, previously under the British zone, they have a French zone, they have a British zone, they also became a financial center. I mean, after all, Hong Kong, Shanghai Banking Corporation is started from Shanghai and Hong Kong, right? British rule of law. Okay, so you have now the history of HSBC, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and also quite big in those days in Singapore and in Malaya, as you recall, right? And then there was Chartered Company. Now, Standard Chartered is the combination between Chartered Bank of the East, and then Standard Bank of Africa, in Africa. That's why they became Standard Chartered, right? So the financial center is actually tax-free using British common law, right? Now Shanghai, because Shanghai was serving mainland China, they have exchange control. Hong Kong did not have exchange control. So Hong Kong became the port and the financial logistics center for Chinese trade. So it's very important to mainland China. So when it came back in 1997, Hong Kong boomed, right? Now, at that time, Singapore did not know how to compete against Hong Kong, but they are in the same time zone. So HSBC was the first globally traded shares. What do you mean by that? When HSBC went back to England, and then they bought over banking in America, they traded in 3 time zones. So during daylight hours in here, you trade HSBC shares in Hong Kong. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, London opens, HSBC share now trade from 3 o'clock until, let's say, 9 o'clock. By 9 o'clock, New York is at night, New York is open. You get it? So the HSBC became the first share that was traded globally. But as you now know from history, I'm telling you a fact, HSBC didn't do well in America. They still make most of their profit in Asia, right? So to a large extent, the international financial status depends upon your infrastructure, your environment, and your financial institutions. So to the extent Hong Kong was successful because the Hong Kong civil servants understood they don't interfere. They allow the private sector to do things. In Shanghai, it's a much more state-owned enterprise. Your state-owned banks, state-owned enterprises. Stock market must support also previously state-owned. Singapore, is successful because if the money was coming out of China, the money was coming out of Indonesia and Malaysia, they all go to Singapore. But initially, they did not capture much from China because all the Chinese went to Hong Kong. But today, Singapore is benefiting. If the Middle East got problems, money will fly to Singapore, right? So they've understood how to do this. But Singapore is still a pass-through center. The real business is in Malaysia, in Thailand, Indonesia, in China. The same thing is true of Hong Kong, right? It's a pass-through center. They manage well for you, but the actual industry has to be China, has to be elsewhere. Now, as an international financial center, you capture that real business, not just the financial business, is very critical. So for us to put it in Labuan, Labuan was, of course, part of the Straits Settlement. You look at Straits Settlement. You have Penang, Singapore, Malacca, and Labuan, and to some extent Hong Kong was a part of that British, financial center chain. But Labuan was not so important because, it only had coal, and when the ships don't need coal, Labuan fell apart. Borneo economy didn't grow that fast. Some oil, but not so important, right? And as an offshore financial center, you don't have the same, focus as Singapore. Singapore was very focused. We will catch up with Hong Kong, right? But today, Singapore stock market is still, I can't remember the exact number, but it's definitely much, much smaller than the Hong Kong market, right? But today, even the Hong Kong market, cannot dream that the Shenzhen market is bigger than the Hong Kong market, but it's still the most important IPO market in the world. So every financial center needs to have their own strategic positioning, and how do you execute it? So to a large extent, Labuan's position cannot be independent of its competitors, and cannot be independent of the Malaysian economy, right? Now, now that Labuan is a federal territory no longer, or Sabah's strategy not necessarily the same as Labuan's strategy. So, these issues, happen. Well, you see, Labuan's, the first point that I would like to make, because of global OECD rules on taxation and anti-money laundering, the old idea of the Caribbean offshore financial center as a money laundering center is gone. So that business not successful anymore. Okay? There is still a retained business because in Hong Kong, you can register a company under British Virgin Islands, which is very easy. You just fill up a form, you register in BVI, and then you can list in Hong Kong using that BVI. But even that is beginning to go. Okay? Because, the US authorities are now looking very closely. Who is BVI? Who is behind it? Is this money laundering? It is terrorist financing. Is it financing anti-sanction busting, rules and regulations? So that model is also going. So how Labuan positions itself within these changing rules is itself a different story. Okay. But to me, I think it's more important that the real economy of Sabah does well rather than the finance side.
So now we come to the question caused by cheap editor for you.
Right.
So being a Sabahan with your extensive and well-known experience, what would you focus in your advice to the stakeholder?
Well, as I said, I already given you the broad way of thinking about it. You must understand that every country, every individual, every company is now working in an era of uncertainty. There's so many changing positions. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. There is no silver bullet. There is no one surgery that I cut off and things will be everything okay. This is long marathon. It is blood, sweat, and tears, I'm sorry to say, hard work. Okay? But hard work also needs to be focused. So the key question is, what does Sabah want to position itself in this new environment? Now, then you step back. So the international position I understand a little bit, much better than I understand. Sabah. First point. Let me say this. I learned last night from a Sabahan. I don't have his permission to say this, but I thought he had a brilliant view. Okay? Think about the South China Sea as the Mediterranean of the East. Right? Now, the Mediterranean in Europe, which is the cradle of European civilization, okay, right, has maybe what, 500 million Europeans on the north side, maybe, 500 million in the Middle East side, and then some Africans on the north side of the North Africa, actually not that much population, right? Whereas actually around the South China Sea, of which Sabah is a very strategic position, we have China, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, rich technology, world class. Up north, on our west side, Vietnam, Thailand. Okay? Then, Semenanjung, right? And then Indonesia in the south. And they put their capital in Nusantara on the island of Borneo. So how can we go wrong? Our geography is perfect. And at a time when, the Middle East model is shaken, let me put it this way, right? It's really shaken. The money will flow here. So the question when the money flows here is not about they coming with money and then say, oh, I like to buy this, I like to buy that. The real issue is where are our projects that fit their needs, right? So this is just about the West money coming this way, but the real money, the real money with technology is up north. The growth zone in the world in the last 50 years, 60 years, has been the rise of Japan, the rise of South Korea, the rise of China, and now today, the amazing technology story of Taiwan. Right? You add all four economies, I don't want to get into politics, the four economies together, you are looking at 15 trillion, something like $15 trillion worth of foreign assets they hold, plus that best technology. Don't underestimate Japan. Japan may have, gone down a little bit, but they have excellent technology, right? And Taiwan is now the center of all the chips. The best chips are now made in Taiwan. Korean also, right? Okay? So a lot of them are also thinking of maybe I used to put money in America and put money in Europe. Europe now is in trouble. America, I have a uncertainty over certain issues. Okay? The consumer market in America is not going to grow very far because they're also aging. The consumer market of ASEAN, which is half the population of China, 700 billion, 700 million, right? And half the population of India, okay, which is again the fastest rising economy. ASEAN got all the wealth, right, that can service that. But where is the technology? Where is the talent? We have got young people. So that's why education is so critical. And therefore, how do we educate, not just educate the young, but re-skill our existing workforce? It's really a very strategic decision. Now, I think Sabah, most of the universities are actually in Semenanjung, right? We have, two public universities here and, some colleges. Sarawak also has some international universities and also, UNIMAS, right? So the question is, why can't we have more universities in Sabah, right? We have so much research to be done. We have the biggest biodiversity in the Malayao area, the Danum Valley, right? In our oceans, in our swamps, right? In our coral reefs, right? Up in Kinabalu, we have high altitude fauna and flora, and also mineral, right? So we need the university to do this research. We need the universities to tell the story, right? Not just writing academic papers, but as you recall, how did the Danum Valley and the Mulu caves got discovered? Cambridge University came and wrote the paper, and suddenly we got, wow, this is fantastic. Okay, so the whole education strategy story needs to be developed. Now that's an aspiration, but now how do we execute it is very critical.
Next question. From your observation, what would Sabah need to do in order to progress faster? Chief Minister Hajiji has made a pact with innovative ideas on the blue economy and renewable, like the thermal energy, which is new even to the rest of Malaysia. So how can you help this regard?
Well, it's not about me helping in a sense, right? It's really about I'm trying to understand, what our strengths are. And you can understand in a macro term, but when it comes down to projects, it's micro. Okay? Because a macro, a big picture, it comprises of micro projects and programs. So you can have an aspiration, but how do you implement it will have to be at the project and the program level. That part I learned in the World Bank. And that part also depends very much on very good expertise in designing and managing and error correcting these projects. Okay. So I shared with you one of the early experiences that I had. I came back as a young chartered accountant. I was working in an accounting firm, and we got a project, looking at the Ubi Kayu project in Kudak. We built the biggest under the ADB project. We built the biggest power plant, but there was not enough Ubi Kayu produced, and the reason was that the consultants who advised on the project planted the ubi root straight rather than on the side. The orang, the orang rungus would already know, and anybody and any Sabahan would know you plant it on the side because the topsoil is very shallow. You put it straight, it will hit the laterite and won't grow. It's not healthy. So the best Western consultants don't necessarily know what else is going on. So to a large extent, everything is down to detail. So in the blue economy, we not only have to have the aspirations, we have to have the right project that will be designed in such a way that if some Middle East investor or some European investor, or Chinese, Japanese, or whatever, when they come, they say, wow, you already designed the project, and all you ask from me is how to bring the technology or how I bring the money. They'll buy. But if you say, oh, I got very good thing, come. I come. Wow, very beautiful, very nice. But where's the project? No project. Oh, but I have to go back and design. But when I go back, my team of experts will say, hey, it's not just Sabah is competing. There's another blue economy project somewhere in Kalimantan where I can go. So they will go. If they start thinking like that, they will go. Right? So the whole idea is we must develop the team that will understand the blue economy, design the project, and actually implement it. Now, in some of the ecotourism projects, you're already seeing this. I've now seen one or two projects I believe are wonderful. They have very good story to tell. They're willing to hire international consultants, okay, because they believe in the Sabah future. They want to design it in a way. And, if that fits, we all wish it success, but maybe, all projects will face issues. But if we don't
move forward, we will never learn. And I think we have to be realistic. There is no perfect project. There is no perfect program, but we always move forward, even if we have some setbacks, right? So if the people understand how we do this, it's an issue. Okay, somebody asked me that and say, oh, the oil shock is very big. I said, Malaysia is the luckiest country in the world. We are a surplus net oil exporter. But of course, I did not mention that one of the biggest problems also is that the subsidy is so large that it's a fiscal issue, right? So then the question is, can we do something about the subsidy side? And I think the federal government is beginning to look at it. And it will impact Sabah because, the oil energy price go up. It costs, Sabah costs are higher than in Semenanjung. So we have to think about these impact. But I think, the big issue is that the money is now beginning to come from the north. The surplus economies in the north, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, they are beginning to look at, projects in the south. Similarly, those people in the Middle East, in Europe, if they, are beginning to look at, diversifying, Sabah will have potential. That's why I say we need now to spend some of our resources on how to design the projects and the programs in such a way, it's like a shop, right? Every economy is like a shop. You can make the best product. If you don't know how to market it, you cannot sell. So you must know how the story must be done. If you create a very good brand, you will sell. Okay? I mean, I learned this, right? If you buy a melon, right? The melon can cost 20 ringgit. But a Japanese melon put in a beautiful wooden box with a ribbon tied out is $200. All right? Okay? So, 1,000 ringgit. So it's about marketing. It's about packaging. Okay? So to a large extent, we now need to start thinking very much like a supply chain way of thinking. You need to produce, yes, but you need to design. You need to design, you need to package, you need to produce, you need to market, okay? And you need to finance, you need the money. All this is a very complex process of doing this. Okay, I've been very lucky because, I went to the World Bank, I understood this. Then when I was heading the Fung Global Institute, I worked from one of the most brilliant logistics people, manufacturing people, not manufacturing, but logistic people. I understand the business way of looking at how to do development. And of course, I was very much involved in Hong Kong and China. So I began to understand how they develop, their supply chains and manufacturing base. And today, the marketing and the branding, right? So I think if we begin to understand our customers, begin to understand the investors, we will be able to design our projects and programs in a way to fit their needs. Okay? And it's all about telling the right story. Well, today manufacturing is a very complex story. So I will not go into the details, but let me give you my way of looking at it. This story I could not have explained even 5 years ago. Okay? Let me tell you how AI and robotics has changed the game. As you know, Hong Kong used to be a textile manufacturing center. Then Hong Kong wages became so high, they moved the textiles to China. And then, so some of my friends are the world's largest manufacturers of shirts. So they sold the shirts to Arrow, they sold the Brook Brothers, top class shirts, right? That's cotton. But today, if they say, Xinjiang cotton is under sanction, you're not allowed to be imported, you have to find new markets. But, 20 years ago, you may need 2,500 workers to manufacture 100,000 shirts. Today, 5 years ago, they can reduce that 2,500 to maybe 500 workers because a lot of processes are automated. Today, that 500 can be 50. Same 100,000 shirts because it is that 50 are in the AI design to how to, train the robot to do the cutting, to do the designing, to do the stitching, right? And once I program it, the robot can actually do all of it, and the robot is working 24 hours with no lights, right? A data center now has nobody in it except the watchman outside. And you don't even switch it off. There are no lights inside, no workers inside. It's all just the computers, the chip, doing the running. So manufacturing has changed the game. But that manufacturing, that robotic AI manufacturing, depend two critical things: energy and talent. If you don't have the energy, you can't do it. Right? So the old way of thinking was, wow, Sabah got, a labor, but we don't necessarily have the training to do this step by step by step. Today, with the automatic, we can do it. But if we don't have the talent to design this thing and attract the management to do this, it's not like it's not impossible, but it's very costly. So who is going to put the money and take the risk of doing this in Sabah? The answer is, ultimately, it's your own people. You see, the foreigner that come, they want to invest in you, but they also want their pound of flesh. Let's be realistic about it, right? To give you another illustration, in Penang, we are, the Penang is the sixth largest semiconductor center, but 80% of that value added is foreign companies. If they increase the tariff more than the 19%, those foreign companies may move overnight. What have you got at the end? So to a large extent, you have to design your own local champions, right? And your local champions, even in badminton, you cannot train a badminton champion overnight. You can have one, but you cannot sustain it. So, look at Malaysia, right? In the badminton side, how long it took for us to have true Mohiba badminton champions, Malay, Indian, Chinese, competing at world class, right? And not just at the world class in certain area, but in the youth area. That took years, right? And we did it not ourselves, but with foreign coaches, right? So, and then it became a branding, it became financing, it created club, the institutional infrastructure. So to succeed, you have to build an ecosystem. That ecosystem will require people who are willing to take risks. So I can't answer on specific or this area or that area or that area. It depends upon the entrepreneur, supported by the community and supported by the government, as free of corruption as possible. Okay? And then you can move forward. Because if your costs are high, you can't succeed. If you can't scale, you can't succeed. And Sabah is very small. We have a very big land. We have 75,000 square kilometers, right? But our population is still quite small. And our education system is still, in the stage of growing. So we have to rethink all this. We cannot hope to achieve Olympic because it takes a long time to build an Olympic champion. Well, you see, there is in Semenanjung, I know, companies that are specializing in, poultry, pig farming, like any other animal farming, has its pollution issues and susceptibility to vulnerable to virus problems. You look at prawn, right? How many years it took prawn to get it right? Okay, you had one virus, one fungus, whole crop wiped out, right? So, this is very specialized work. The good news is that certain countries like China, like Vietnam and all this, they actually have evolved some of this. Thailand also done very well in this. But how do you do it in Sabah? Well, we have to see that, right? It's too easy to talk in generalities. It's much more important you focus on ultimately it's people. People who have the talent to manage the technology and the actual management of the issue, and then also talent to take the risk. Well, mining, you see, there are, first point, you cannot do everything. Second point, everything has got plus or minus. There's no such thing as free lunch. So, I only recently got some information on the mining sector. And I think the good news for Sabah is that mining has got a lot of potential. The bad news is we got the best example of my own mine. It was a big scar, and we are still suffering from the cost, right? So how do we find the right balance is really the crucial issue. Okay? Now, with hindsight, it wasn't copper mine in Mammoth, it was rare earths and gold. Right? So, we ended up with the pollution and somebody ended up with the profit. Right? So, the past is the past, but we must learn from our mistakes. And so therefore we really need to have a very focused way of moving forward. Now, that is a trade-off. That's a conversation. So I don't want to say no to this, no to that. Let's think about it. Let's have a good conversation. Well, I was recently in Sarawak, and I congratulated my Sarawak friends on the 4 E's. They got their economy right, they got their energy right, they got their environment right, and they got their education right. So my Sarawak friends said, we want to concentrate on education because if we succeed, we will have the best trained Malaysian 10 years from now. Which is a very good aspiration. I wish them every success because, why should we say this is Sabah, Sarawak, Perak, Perlis? Okay? If any state succeed, it's good for Malaysia. How can we say, I don't want you to succeed? We must make sure every state succeed. Because any state that succeeds, good for Malaysia. Right? We cannot be wishing states bad, but we have to wish everybody good. So why don't we be a little bit more relaxed about trying different things? You are good in this, you try that. You are good in that, you try that. Okay? And only by trying will we learn where the success is, where the failures are. So to me, the global situation has now given us very valuable lessons. How we apply in Malaysia, how we apply in Sabah, to me, the timing is right, the geography is right, the opportunity is right. The question is, do people agree? 天时地利人和. If we don't have harmony, nothing can be done. If you fight every day, nothing can be done. Only by give and take, understanding each other's strengths, weaknesses, then we can compete. Right? Because this world is a very cruel world. Nobody is coming to help except yourself. So every day I look myself in the mirror, I count every day as a blessing. If we have the opportunity to serve, we serve. If we cannot, my wife and I will go and take a cruise long where we can makan and I can forget about everybody's problem. But I think time has come for us to give back a little bit. And if the advice is found to be useful, I count it as a blessing. If it's not good, then I blame only myself.